the character, who was thankful that they were not like all the others. It might sound familiar if you have recently seen either the movie or the musical of Shrek. Lord Farquaad was a good-looking, wealthy man who took his role as Lord of the Land very seriously. Lord Farquaad was a man of small stature, but large words and actions who forced all the fantastical creatures out of his land because they were different. He was set on becoming king someday, so he sent out another man named Shrek to rescue the princess far away in the tower so she could be brought back to be wed and become the queen. This man Shrek was of large stature, had a bit of a green tint to his skin, and had a thick accent. He smelled funny, he was gruff, he lived on a swamp. He was rather jaded by society, but he was very humble in his words and actions. Lord Farquaad was so happy that he was normal that he paraded around as if he had nothing to hide. But, as we find out later in the story, Lord Farquaad is what we call a halfling. He is the son of Grumpy, one of the 7 dwarves. Of course, being one of the freaks is nothing to be ashamed of, because he's surrounded by fairy tale creatures like the 3 blind mice, the ugly duckling, Pinocchio, the gingerbread man, the white rabbit, Humpty Dumpty, Peter Pan, and many others who love and support one another for being different. But, as many fairy tales end for the villain, Farquaad doesn't change his ways, and he continues to deny his freakness, and he wants nothing to do with his part in the fairy world. And eventually, he's eaten by a giant purple dragon. Shrek, however, ends up having many friends, including a talking donkey. And all the fairy tale creatures come to live on his swamp, and in the end, he wins the heart of the princess that he rescued from the tower. They live happily ever after, and Farquaad's ever after isn't exactly so happy as he lives in the dragon's stomach. So, after hearing the gospel text compared to the story of Shrek and Farquaad, do you hear any similarities? Our Pharisee is proud that he isn't like the others who are looked down upon by society. From reading some of the New Testament and listening to a lot of fairly shallow Christian interpretations, most of us have an impression that Pharisees are these bad guys, these stereotypical villains, these hypocrites. But that's not true at all. Pharisees were highly respected. They were moral, religious people. This man, the Pharisee, was a religious leader. He was educated, morally upright, faithful in worship, and he tithed more than what was required. Pharisees in those days were the forward, progressive religious types. Yet in this parable, we see the Pharisee is not an example of someone humbled by their faith. In verse 11, the Pharisee says he's happy he isn't a rogue, which is someone who is a dishonest person. He says he's happy he's not a thief or an adulterer. He even gloated that he isn't like the tax collector who is praying right next to him. If that doesn't take guts to say out loud, I don't know what does. But it doesn't make it okay for him to say. In no way does it make him better than any of the people that he mentioned in verse 11. In relation to not being better than another person, I recently saw a video online of a father talking to his daughter, pumping her up for the first day at school. He asked her if she was ready for school. She said yes, and he told her to repeat these phrases after me. They said things like, I'm smart, I'm beautiful, I'm respectful, I work hard, and I am strong. But what hit me the hardest in this video is when they said, I am not better than anyone, and no one is better than me. What's even more interesting about this video is this father and daughter were African American. These are people who know what it's like to be a minority, to feel like an outsider. They know what it feels like to be the other. They know how it feels for a person to say, I'm glad I'm not in their shoes. In the video, their house didn't look like a mansion. It wasn't immaculately clean. The little girl was not wearing name brand clothing. But this father taught her and then reminded her on the first day of school that she is no better than anyone else, and that no one can put her down because they think they're better than she is. The last thing he asked her in this video was, "What are you?" And she said, "I am blessed." Would we be able to think the same thing if we were viewed as the tax collector in Luke's gospel? Tax collectors were typically people chosen by landowners or royalty to tax their own people. These people were seen like the sheriff of Nottingham. He did his duty and was respected, but he was not well liked by his people. If you think hard enough, have you experienced a time when you have said, "Better them than me"? Or maybe, "I'm glad I don't act like that," or "I'm glad I don't look like that," or "I'm glad I don't smell like that," or "I'm glad I don't eat like them"? Who hasn't? We are only human. But instead of thinking these things, we should be the tax collector in this parable, humbled by the immense and ever-present love of God. We should praise and thank God for all the things we have and not worry about the things that we don't. We should admit that we are worthy of God's love, but we are a sinner all the same. Because after all, we are human. In the final verse of our text, it tells us that the exalted shall be humbled, and the humble shall be exalted. What do you think Jesus means by this? Anyone? What do you think about the humble being exalted or the exalted being humbled? Sorry for putting you on the spot.
That all will be equal as one.
Yes, thank you, Guy. The Message translation reads this last verse as this: "If you walk around with your nose in the air, you're going to end up flat on your face. But if you're content to simply be yourself, you will become more than yourself." If our noses are too high in the air, we won't be able to see if there's a bump in the road and we could fall. Keeping our heads straight forward, hopeful for something, yet realistic about life's hard choices and obstacles around us, is where we find ourselves as Lutherans. We are equally sinner and saint. We are the other, and we welcome the other. Luckily, Jesus is a pretty good example of someone to follow who welcomes the other and is the other. St. Peter, let us love one another. Let us love the other. Let us love our neighbor and let us love ourselves for exactly who we are and who we're not,